Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Museum of the African Diaspora. My name is Nia McAllister, and I'm the Senior Public Programs Manager here at MOAD. Thank you for joining us this evening for a performance of These Boots Were Made for Walking by Anina Major. Today's program features a live performance by Anina Major and will be followed with a short dialogue between her and Kijo Lee, our Chief of Curatorial Affairs and Public Programs at MOAD. This program is presented in conjunction with the exhibition Unruly Navigations, which is on view in the gallery behind you, also curated by Kijo Lee and on view through September 1st. These Boots Were Made for Walking is a sculptural performance by artist Anina Major, which tells a tale of fractured cultural connections across the Black diaspora by adopting body movement as an expression of agency and a form of problem solving to comprehend the traces of complex histories inherited. With that, enjoy.
I haven't had this on since I first made the piece, so. Woo! took these boots to
So with that, we're going to shift to our conversation to reflect on that performance. And I'd like to officially introduce Anina Major and Kijo Lee. Anina Major, yes, we can start with a round of applause. Anina Major is a visual artist from the Bahamas, and her decision to establish a home contrary to the location in which she was born and raised motivates her to investigate the relationship between self and place as a site of negotiation. By utilizing the vernacular of craft to reclaim experiences and relocate displaced objects, her practice exists at the intersection of nostalgia and identity. And Kijo Lee is our Chief of Curatorial Affairs and Public Programs at MOAD. In this role, Lee oversees the strategic direction for the museum's exhibitions and programs and leads globally on identifying and promoting emerging artists from the African diaspora and works to expand MOAD's reach and influence locally, nationally, and internationally. Join me in welcoming our two guests.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Anina, for that incredible performance. And as I mentioned to you, we're actually going to start this conversation with you. So I wondered if in the audience you would offer one word to describe what you just witnessed or how you experienced it. Just one phrase, but short one if you have to do that. I know one word is hard. Any volunteers, please?
Riveting.
Riveting. Cathartic.
Strength.
Strength.
Release.
Release.
Perseverance.
Perseverance. Well, any others, please?
Crunch.
Crunch. I'm sorry? Past. Absolutely. Fika. Defiance.
Yes. Breath.
Breath.
Joy.
Joy. Any others?
Rhythmic.
Rhythmic. Yes. I wanted to know what was playing in your head, and I started to jam a little bit. I was like, I don't know what's happening, but I really want to know. And so then I will turn to you, Anina, and say, now that we've heard from the audience how this experience felt for them or what they were able to see, hear, and understand, how does that make you reflect on what happened here? Because you rarely do these performances live. And so we had to sort of do a little, not too much convincing, but yes, you just had to ask. But thinking about the translation between the film and this performance and then hearing the immediate responses of the audience, I just wanted to open with.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Mm.
Thank you all for coming, and again, thank you for your kind words. It was nice. It was very delightful to hear those words because those are kind of all the things that I'm thinking through with the work in preparation for this being a live performance. I had been thinking through kind of the idea of fragments and remnants for a very long time, conceptually and even like physically. And a lot of my work is about these kind of private performances that happen in my studio. And I've become very comfortable with that kind of space because it's just me and whoever I may bring in to document it. And so preparing for this, I was a little concerned about whether, the things that I was thinking through in creation of the piece would translate to you actually witnessing that come to life. And so it was just really great to hear some of the same words I'd be saying to myself that I want the work to speak to, for that to come out in a live, immediate, kind of very in-person way versus after the fact, or, because the video installation is after the fact. This is like it in when it's happening, like real time, and so it was really good to hear that.
It's wonderful. Yeah. And you were saying that this practice of using what you call shards, but playing and speaking to the past this performance brings together more than one stream of thinking in your practice. I was hoping maybe you would share a little bit about Ostracons of the Atlantic and these other series that come together in this way.
I mean, I definitely at one point thought I wanted to be a historian in my life, and it was because I was trying to find answers to questions that ultimately I probably would not find the answers to, because that history is somewhat lost. But that was actually encouraging in some ways, because it was about, well, how do I make sure that the present day isn't lost? And what are some of the ways that I, as an artist, can allude to the little bit I do know in the past, and how do they transfer to the present, and how they exist in the future? So I think I started with Derek Wilcox. He has a poem where he talks about fragments and how that composes the identity of the Caribbean and the people from there, because it's kind of like an amalgamation of all these different places coming together over time, through history. And then from that research, I really started to think about, like, well, what do we do with those kind of nuggets that aren't necessarily connected in a literary way or scholarly way, but, like, how do we maintain them? And we see that a lot in music. We see that a lot in food. We see it in language. We see it in arts. And so I'm really interested in that space. So I started working through that in my own way. I spent some time in Provincetown, and that's when I think I was introduced to the concept of these crushed shells and using them as kind of a ground covering. And to me, they just instantly read as kind of fragments, which I do keep myself. So I do a lot of ceramic sculpture, those who are aware of my practice. And sometimes things don't work out. And I have a ritual of taking a hammer to all work that doesn't work out, which results in shards. And I kind of save those shards. I've been saving them. And something kind of clicked between these pieces that I had destroyed and this mound of crushed shells, and the idea that if everything was to kind of disappear right now, I'm so poetic and dramatic, but if everything was to, like, disappear right now, these little fragments will indicate, like, oh, she was an artist and she made these things. And so to me, they kind of just, like, really, like, I started thinking about them as my own little potpourri or seasoning. And I started making these kind of ground coverings for installations that I would do. And that was back in 2019. And whenever I want to kind of evoke a sense of past or time or like an accumulation of something, I tend to pull on this material that I've kind of evolved over time. And this is years in the making. Like, all of these little pieces are from, like, early 2000s, like, that I've just been keeping and piling up and trying to go through this kind of, like, accumulation of time. And again, another, like, poetic reference I thought about was, like, oh, well, if all the water disappeared and we were just left with the ground, would it look something like this? That's
and that
kind
can
of
be
like,
a little bit poetic and dramatic, because for me it's also like the palimpsest, the trace of every performance, because when these crates came in, I was thinking about all the times that they've been rolled out onto different floors, each performance, and when you were performing and really stamping in and digging in place, it felt like an excavation. And also when you lean down and lift particular ones and toss them here and there, it feels like archaeology. And so the reason that I wanted you in this show was because of those kinds of connections that you are bringing to the fore. So the entire Unruly Navigations is about seeking those gossamer tethers in between. That is actually how the African diaspora comes together. We can be from utterly different cultures, but there is sometimes these really concrete, visible, noted, written, meeting that so elusive standard of evidence, but mostly it's these gossamer tethers of when I say bitch, you know what I mean,
Right.
no matter where you're from,
Right,
So,
exactly.
so there's a way in which.
Or if you like look at somebody, like just even performing, like the few glimpses I got of like an eye contact
Yes.
can give so much meaning, like has so much in it, so much language. And yeah, I love that. I love that there are these things that we can't explain in words that exist, and how they manifest is really exciting for me.
Would you mind talking a bit in particular about the works, the pieces you were picking up and tossing?
Yeah.
And their significance.
So, that's a long story. Because, like, how I'm, like, okay, let's think about this, like, seasoning, you know, you've got, like, different herbs and different spices from different places. Well, that's basically how all this comes together, because I keep accumulating different things. And the pieces that I was picking up today were cast of mammies, little mammy figurines. And I'm sure everybody's
Is
familiar
everyone
with them.
familiar with what?
Yeah, they're,
Okay.
yeah. And it's interesting because, you know, being from the Caribbean, everybody thinks like there wasn't a time where we had to kind of reckon with these objects. And we did. In fact, my sibling who's here, we've had like heated conversations about it because in some of the tourist markets, they would have these figurines and be selling them and would look just like me. And I'm just kind of like, how are you going to sell that? Like, is there, what is the dissonance there?
Yes.
Like, how are we disconnecting from something that's like clearly connected visually, right? And so I never kind of forgot that conversation that we had because it was so loaded, and it really, you know, it was on a trip where we both were in the Bahamas, and we both live in the U.S. now. And so to bring back that conversation for me was really to cycle through like, well, when do we stop making these or having these things made in China and manufactured to then give to a person, a black person, to then sell to another black person? Like, when do we stop that? Like, when does that become like we will not engage? I mean, we've already established the role that these objects have played, right? We've established that. But when does it stop? Like, when does it become? And so I kind of wanted to destroy them all. And I think that's a fair and valid emotion when you see them. But, of course, I understand how they're historical. I also have, like, respect for historical artifact. And so I started casting them. And that's what you see here. I started casting them out of porcelain so that I could break them. And so I could have that satisfaction that I was dying for, to destroy them and to say what could be birthed out of the destruction of this object. What does it mean for me to do that? What kind of agency does that give me? And then how do I go on from that? Like, am I the same person once I've let go of that? Yeah, you know those rituals where you destroy things.
Yeah.
So that was kind of like where I was with that, and that ended up in this kind of mix. Because again, it's just like remnants I haven't forgotten.
Yes.
But it's present.
And you've even said that you recall, like, that you have favorites or favorite pieces or favorite shards, or you've noticed when someone has taken something away because you're like, oh, where did that one go?
Yeah.
And so I find that it's also, to my I'm thinking it's also this archaeology of memory, personal memory, because you have such specific relationships with what to the rest of us feels like an organic mound that just occurred. And so, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about, I mentioned you saying that this wasn't necessarily an endurance practice, but it is. Having been the person who scooped out these shards to place them on the structure that's in the theater, I was like, this is heavy and annoying. But it helped me to understand the performance. It helped me to really understand the complicated, but can you talk a bit about your performance?
Yeah.
And
how it came to be.
How it came to be, and talk a little bit about your longer, more endurance performances.
Yeah, I mean, my whole practice is probably about very long processes. So when I make ceramic sculpture, it's woven, which requires this long process of like preparing the clay in different ways, making strips and everything. So I think it's just me personally that loves long, drawn-out things that require you to pay attention. I think that's me. But I do think that this performance came from just a whole slew of things. When like I said, I had discovered this kind of crushed shells, and I was thinking through how the shell is this protective element, and I love that idea because a lot of my work is about like preserving. And when I was installing it the first time, I had to step on it to kind of even it out. And when I was doing that, I was like, God, this sounds really good. Like, it sounds really good. It was like activating all of my senses, and it just never left me, that feeling. And then I started thinking about how in another lifetime I'd love to be a dancer. So these things just started coming together as like, well, what if I danced on these shells? And like, what would my feet do to destroy these objects? And like, how could I use that as some kind of like, I don't know, act of resilience or act of power? Like, how does that become empowering for me? What does it mean for me to activate the ground in that way? And I started thinking about monuments and how our relationship to the land and what those look like, and how they don't always look like something that's erected from the ground. Maybe it's something that's buried and sits at a level that requires you to be down here, closer to it. And that's really where it came from, just all of the things that I love, all of the things that I know that we love. When we think about dance and how it has liberated us in so many ways and continues to liberate us and continues to be just beautiful expression of who we are. I mean, TikTok's out of control right now. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you just think through all those things, and I'm like, how could you not engage in that way? So it really came to me, and I think that this iteration has been really fun because I'm thinking about how I want to expand this more and make it larger and invite others to have the same feeling that I'm having. Like, what does that mean? So,
What if there were an entire room?
Yeah.
All amplified.
That has to be 10 years from now, because you know how long it takes.
Listen, I
don't destroy that much work, y'all. So it'll be a while before we get him up for that. But it's great. It's accumulation over time. I can look at this and pretty much any shard tell you like what it was.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Maybe we can talk a bit about the backyard theater, about the installation, which you inspired, and, you know, why the backyard theater?
Yeah.
Why that in particular? And then we can talk a bit about how the structure came to be or what it was meant to do for the work, but yes.
Yeah. So the backyard theater is me kind of referencing the idea in the Bahamas of just how once you have a yard, you can do anything. And it's just like we can set up a play stage, we can set up a movie theater, we can set up a concert stage, we have a huge backyard center party. And I wanted that kind of energy where you felt like you were a little bit outside. I constantly look at wooden structures at home in the Bahamas because they're usually made from just the materials that are available. You know, once a structure becomes no longer being used, there's this kind of recycling of the shutters or recycling of the door, and it ends up being like part of a wall. And we engage with these structures all the time. Like, I think one of the pictures I showed you was my mom getting breakfast from this stand. And it was just like, I remember going, oh, I love that stand. It's so cute. It has like a window that opens up, and, you know, for a few hours a day. The top yellow part that's in the theater. Like, just this idea that you can have these spaces that erect really quickly, serve such a utilitarian purpose, and then they kind of shut down. And then even if that spot, your favorite like little shack to get fruit or crab or whatever you're getting, it then becomes reused into something else. And the environment kind of grows around it. I think another inspiration was an umpire's booth at a softball field. and they literally built it around a palm tree that's growing right up through a 2-story structure. And you can see how, like, the bottom structure was there, and then they needed more space, so they just went on top of it. But they were like, we won't cut down this tree, we'll just build around this tree and cut a little hole in the floor. And I was like, yeah, because you don't need to destroy the tree. It's just like these wonderful, like, moments of creativity that when I can do a nod at, I like to do it. It makes me feel like safe.
Yeah.
If I could explain it any other way, it just feels home in a space that may not be.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And because it feels like home, you are exacting about how those environments get created. And so I was wondering if you would talk a little bit more about your installation practice and your ceramics and how they integrate, because what I've seen, especially recently, and I'm hoping even more, is you creating these environments, but they're incredibly specific.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm always responding to where I am.
Yes.
So, I mean, because you just, I don't know, maybe other people do that, but I don't. But I like to come into a space and see what the space says to me about how it would like to be activated, and then think about how I could tell a story through an installation. And what are the components? And it just builds over time. So with this one, you know, we had talked about it being this kind of enclosed room, and there being this curved wall that could allow for you, if you sat in the front row, to almost be in it. And I was like, I love that. And just thinking through, like, there's a part in the video where my foot, like, goes to the edge of the frame.
Yes.
And I really like that kind of interaction, because at some point you're like, I mean, you know, I'm not going to walk off the screen, but there is this illusion that, like, at that point you could come and meet me. And where we would meet is this kind of bed that's in the front that kind of continues into the 2-dimensional realm. And that's what I'm constantly thinking about. How do we blur those lines and create these narratives that allow people to enter and exit at different times? Yeah. That's kind of how I think through the installation. Like, I want people to be in it and be able to come in and exit however they feel comfortable. Yeah. I think that's the best I could describe my installation practice.
Has there been a moment that you've installed an exhibition and been like, that is it?
Every moment. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? It's not over until we have that moment.
Yeah.
No, I really do.
No,
I really do.
No, that's a great answer. No. That's
I mean, it might not be what I originally thought it was going to be. That happens every single time as well.
Yes.
Like, you know, when you're putting together the work, it's so layered that I have to be open to what the space is bringing that I didn't expect, right? Like, sometimes the space, you've been to it like 3 times, and it's telling you, this is what I want. You bring that, and then the space goes, oh, no. But this would be better if you did this. And I'm always open to a space speaking to me in that way once I'm installing. And so the feeling of, that's it. That's what I'm looking for at the end. But what I started with, I know is probably going to change. Very rarely, I think that may have happened once. Once, maybe. Yeah. That I planned it, and that's exactly what happened. And not in a bad way. I just want to preface that. Not in a bad way. Not like, oh, what I wanted couldn't happen.
No,
just that it wasn't the strongest use of the space.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I wanted to take a moment to open it up for questions from the audience. We may return and have more conversation, but it felt like a good moment to say, okay, Paul.
I thought that as you were saying it, when you were talking about like your expectation as you're creating and like the moment, like in the video when your foot is coming off, and then how is that experience and your perception of it elevated as the creator, and your perception of it for us as an audience impacted by sound?
Yeah. Well, so this is really interesting. That's a good question because, I couldn't hear what you heard. Sorry. Because I was in my own zone, right? So I didn't really hear. And so I probably will need to watch this and listen to this again.
I videoed it like.
Oh, perfect. So that I would need to watch it and see, like, what sounds I was actually making versus when I did the video, it was just me, and I wasn't listening to no music. So I was making the piece that you see in the theater. So I'm very much aware of what sounds happened when, because I'm actually experiencing it at the same time. This is a little on mute. So it'll be interesting to see when I watch it back what it generates for me as far as like sound and rhythm with this piece. Yeah. I hope does that answer your question?
It did. Because I really wanted to know your perception of it in real time that we couldn't see from the video.
Yeah.
And we would never get to ask that question, and since you just did it.
Yeah. I tell you, it was interesting. I'm still processing it. Because when I made the video piece, it really was about the feet. And I can't control where you looking while I'm actually in the space. So I was really
I was making video too, and I was down at the feet, and I was like, but wait a minute.
I know, and I was like, I don't know. I don't know how that's going to translate. I mean, I'm open to it, and I'm excited. Again, I'm not done with this. I think you'll see this again in another way that actually takes into consideration that the audience experiences my whole body performing. I thought through this kind of a bit in that I was like, do I want to be on the same ground as the audience? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, I had thought through that, like, do I want to be on the same ground? That installation is purposely elevated so that you are eye level to somebody's feet, and we kind of shift that in this performance. So I'm thinking through all of those things, and it'll be interesting to see how this generates more for me.
It's another accumulation.
Yeah.
The accumulation and iteration. So I would say your practice is very iterative and accumulative simultaneously. So deepens and expands.
Yeah. Very much so.
Yeah. Other questions?
No, I'm back here.
Oh.
Why those deepen?
Yeah. That's
The question was why those specific boots, if anybody.
Well, I like to try to be stylish. That I will say. Keeping it real. But yeah, you're right. Why those boots? And I did think about the boots, because I could have worn some other boots where I'm sure you saw there were some points of instability.
Yes.
Not stable. And I could have tried some other boots. But I really just wanted heels. And I wanted to acknowledge I don't want to say the aunties, but I want to acknowledge
I'm a whole auntie.
the
Let's
style.
acknowledge
Yeah,
our
I know. I
aunties.
wanted to acknowledge our style. You know, sometimes, I mean, I think we can all relate to what it means for me to be in white or barefoot and with long braids. And I'm like, I love that too, but I also love where we've evolved style-wise. Like, we're so creative. And I mean, when you see Beyonce on stage in them boots, or those heels, you just be like, and that's my people. You know what I mean? So I just really wanted something that was a little bit more contemporary, that spoke to the time they were in, and what does it mean for me to engage in this way in heels, which is kind of dangerous. I'm going to admit that. I'm not going to shy about it. I did not realize it until the actual performing in the video piece that I was like, oh, this is not what I thought it would be. I can walk in heels. But now you're asking me to be on this kind of terrain. And I love that, because that was like a moment of like, yeah, that's what this is about. Like, how do we do that? So I just liked them. And they weren't that high, so it worked. Take that creative liberty.
I think, too, the juxtaposition of the daintiness and femininity of the heel versus the ruggedness of the material you're stepping on. Because you would think, somebody would come through with a construction boot and, pound it. But it's just kind of not a shock, but it kind of takes you like, oh, I didn't think about that.
Different sounds.
Yeah, different sound as well. And I love thinking through, femininity in a way that's very powerful. I like bringing that kind of energy to femininity. It's titled "These Boots Are Made for Walking," and I love that song. But I love the kind of messaging behind it, and this idea of taking control, and also in the music video, all the dancers are wearing black booties, so that contributed to the idea that the boots had to be black. So. So there's a
like
nod
the
of that
way
too.
Nancy Sinatra goes, "Come on, boots."
Yeah,
Start walking.
This magic cloak that really just makes it happen. So there was a lot tied up in that selection.
It's also that at certain points when you would step, pieces would keen off the heel and shoot into and causing a whole different kind of sound and a different sort of sense of danger, but also urgency. So I think that with those sort of construction, sort of flat boots, yes, you would still get the crushing. You might even get that, but you wouldn't get maybe that singular little ping off of the point. So other questions.
What was the music you were listening to?
I did listen to These Boots Were Made for Walking. I did. And then I also listened to, so it was like a mix. And I didn't know which one was going to show up, but These Boots Were Made for Walking definitely came up. And then Funky Nassau. Listen. I was also trying to think of songs that would take me to the point where I wanted to move my feet. That was key to me. I was what would make me move my feet? Some songs make you move your top part of your body, but I wanted songs that move the top part of my feet. Beyonce Ya Ya, because she sampled this song. There is also a TikTok, couple second song that samples These Boots Are Made for Walking, but they put this rapper beat to it, so it's kind of fast. And so I don't know if there were moments where you saw I was moving a little faster. That's because I was yes, dance. And I just wanted that kind of moments where there were times where I was moving a little slower and moving a little faster.
So why did you decide to to have headphones on and to listen to music here versus in the video?
Because y'all weren't here. Well, it's a focus thing. I'm gonna be really honest and transparent about that. I don't do performance all the time. And so for me, I wanted to have focus where it was about this and not about the individuals that were witnessing what was happening. And so in a lot of ways, the music was informing how I wanted to behave. Whereas when I was doing that piece, I was by myself. It was quiet. No one was present. There was no distraction, and I could really focus on the sound and the objects on the ground. And so me hearing the music was kind of reminding me of all of the things I was thinking through and allowed me to focus on the ground and not be distracted by the individuals around me. Yeah. That's really what that was. Maybe one day I won't need it. No. I'm human.
We didn't talk a little bit about the other performance that you've done. So one of my favorite performances of yours is Heavy as a Head.
Yeah.
So thinking about maybe if you could describe it a little bit, because it's connected to this, but it is really in sharp contrast with the buoyancy that accompanies this work.
Yeah, Heavy as a Head is a performance piece that is really about endurance, and I have a spiked kind of crown object that I made out of clay that I balance on my head, and I stand for as long as I can, enduring the pain of the spikes into my head. And again, another piece that took years to develop, but was really about parsing through so many things. I was working through the concept of everybody's familiar with the act of balancing something on your head and the act of women doing that. And I created that piece, what was that, like 2016, when I just felt every day I left the house and had to go somewhere and someone say to me, oh, did you see the video that's going around? And I just felt at that time that the expectation of me was to still maintain some kind of posture and grace through a time when really I just didn't want to leave the house. And so that piece came from really sourcing through what it meant to hold on to something a pain that's so internal, but then have to wear it so publicly. Like and there was no room, like at the time I felt there was no room to really say, this thing hurts really badly, and I have to keep my shoulders in composure, or this thing is going to fall down off of me and potentially hurt someone else. And when I did that performance, again, I did it for an installation piece where you would witness it after the fact. But then when I did it publicly, it was almost like a test. It was like, I wonder if people will see what's underneath this stillness. I wonder if anyone will say to me, you know, honey, you don't have to carry that. I'll take it and put it on my head for a minute, and you could take a break. And it was a test to see if that would happen. And it was using it was using visual language that we are so used to seeing, and just being like, oh, she's really strong. She carry all those buckets on her head. That's amazing. And to the point where we like exploited it and made it like logos and postcards. And it was just like, I don't think that's really, I don't know. And so I really wanted to like see what I could learn from that experience, and if there was a way that I could peel back those layers and what it means to do that in these times. And if there was a moment where, if you understood that I was in pain, could I prompt you to say, well, let me hold on to that for a second.
That's the age-old question. I mean, you know, I'm really interested in the liberatory potential of concealment because, to my mind, we keep revealing our soft underbelly in a bid for empathy that doesn't come.
Right.
So I keep wondering, where are the spaces? And we talked about this earlier. Where black women can be of use to no one.
Right.
Or nothing. For a moment, non-utilitarian.
Right.
Also, what does it mean to be able to do that test and then say, test failed?
Or test succeeded.
Or test
I mean,
succeeded.
I did have moments where people asked.
That's beautiful.
I did, and I mean, I was like, that's awesome. I mean, there were times. Well, it's funny because when they asked, I wasn't in pain, so I was like, nah, I got it right now, but come back in like 20 minutes. But yeah, I did have people that asked, surprisingly. I did have one or two people. I had one person. This was the one that really threw me. I had one person that thought it was kind of funny, and I was like, "Oh, man, you're funny about the fact that I'm about to." And in that performance, I actually engage. So when that person like approached me, and I was like, "I don't really think that's funny," I responded, and they were shocked because, again, I'm standing very like statuesque. No one's really talking to me, and they're not expecting me to talk back. But this person spoke to me, and I was like, "Yeah, I don't think that's funny. You should unpack that." Just saying. But the people who did ask, the few people that did ask, surprisingly, were women, and they asked, like, "Does that hurt? You know, I could try it for a bit if you." And I was like, "Not right now. I'm good." So yeah, I don't know why I did that. Still parsing through that experience.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll open up for questions again. Please.
Mine's not exactly a question. Oh, okay.
No, it's actually
Mine's not exactly a question. but I do want to like say my thoughts and then hope you can expand upon it. It reminded me a lot of like the idea of walking on eggshells, but almost in a way that was empowering because you're dancing on them. You're dancing on like statues of mammies on like cowrie shells, on conch shells, and those like the cowries and the conchs remind me a lot of like Caribbean heritage. And then there's stuff that you've made and like a history that is painful, and you're able to like move on top of it in a way that's not gonna hurt, like could hurt you, but you're not letting it hurt you. You're doing it in a way that's like, all of this is my past and I have to move with it regardless. But like, I don't know, the way that you navigated it was very, somebody said defiant, but and I really like that in a way that meant a lot to me. It was very like defiant of a system that tries to keep you down, but you don't let it.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I really love that, because that's so true. But is that not true, though? Like, I mean, all the creativity that comes out of everything that's layered below it, like, that's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I don't have anything to add to that. That was great. What are you talking about? I didn't even think about that, walking on eggshells. That's so true. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, actually along the same lines. I don't know if people have seen Anina's work, but it's very delicate and like just so beautiful. And to know that you then take pieces and destroy and then now have created something that is still beautiful, but is a lesson in how sometimes we do carry things with us, but there still can be beauty in the things that we carry that didn't serve us at that time. I just think it's so beautiful. I think it's so beautiful. And it reminds me that all scars don't have to be ugly, right? Like there can be beauty in these lessons. So thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Yeah. That's so true. That's really how I feel, though. That's really how I feel. Like, I love that. All scars don't have to be ugly. I love that. And I think I was first attracted to your ceramic work, these beautiful woven baskets that slump, that move, that have their edges revealed. And so thank you for that, because that is such a key element of the work. So I'm wondering about your ceramics practice and how you like to make, it's not the wheel, it's the slab. I mean, everything is so generative to me. I think that's what really holds true, and what is coming through in your comments is that, I don't know, I also have been raised in a place that's all about perfection, and I think everybody can relate to that. Like, we got to cover up the ugly, or we got to, like, make something seem like it's absolutely perfect and picturesque. And I just don't think that that's beautiful. I think that what allows me to really enjoy something is able to see the contrast of the two things. And when I work with my ceramic sculpture, for me, that process is so heavy. So again, I'm like all about process, if you haven't realized already. And ceramic material is so, people say they don't like it because it's like you have no control. But I think you have some control. But what I like about it is it has an opinion. Like, it doesn't allow you to just do whatever you want to do. And given the environment that you subject the work to, it speaks back to you. And who am I to mute that voice? Like, I think about it like this wants to say something. And so when the piece droops or the piece like breaks open, I feel like it's saying to me, I want to see that. I want to see inside when it breaks open, or when it has a rough edge but then a shiny surface. Like, that exists in the world. Sharp edges, shiny things, they go together. They are existing. And like, who am I to like try and take that away? So with my ceramic practice, it really is very collaborative with me and the material. I spend time weaving it and making form, and those forms change because of the environment of the kiln that I subjected to. And I allow that process to tell me and inform me about how I navigate this thing called life. So, yeah, that's kind of how I think through it.
Yeah, so I'm listening, and I just wonder what first got you interested in precarity? Because so much of what you do, you know, your practice, your movement, your process, your materials, it's all very precarious. So, you know, I'm seeing you moving, I'm just like, oh no, she's gonna fall. She's gonna fall. But, you know, it's delicate. Everything that you're doing is acting with this delicacy, you know, the sense of just the delicate nature of everything that you're doing, the idea of femininity, the idea of Black femininity. So, you know, you didn't say that you were, but it seems like there's an interest in precarity.
Yeah, I do. I mean, with the ceramic work, there was a moment where I never made anything that didn't have a round bottom. So people were always afraid to put it in spaces because they were like, it will roll over. I think that's where the beauty and creativity lies, in my eyes. And I love that space because something about it feels so personal. Like, life is precarious, in my opinion. I mean, there's so many moments that are so fragile and precious at the same time. And I mean, what does it mean to take a magnifying glass and look at that for a moment? And what do we have to learn from it? I don't know. That's what I've always been attracted to, how things can be so fleeting and then some things can be so lasting. And I'm curious what makes one last and what makes one disappear. And when do we want something to disappear versus leave a remnant behind? Who decides that? How do we decide that? I'm really fascinated by that kind of questioning around just humans in general. And how do we value that? And what do we choose to value, and what that says about our own value structure, which then leads very internally to how we view ourselves and what we're capable of. Like, to me, it's like all interconnected into moving forward, not just with ourselves, but how we interact with others. And I don't know, it's a lot of work, I guess, but that's where I find true creativity in those kind of questions and thoughts. So I don't know when I got into that. I'm trying to think about it, like right now, like when did that start? And it probably was always there, but was heightened when, again, like when I left the Bahamas and started living in the U.S. Because at that point I had to ask myself, like, well, what is my value system? And like, what am I holding on to? What do I want to carry forward? Why do I want to carry it forward? Is that even something to carry forward? Like, all these questions, and then who am I if I don't carry it forward? Like, who did I let down? Why am I letting them down? Why is that a letdown? Like, you know, like all these like questions, and that also happened for me around what I would say is adulthood, right? Like you leave your parents' house, and so now it's like, well, who will I be as a human being in the world? And so all these questions kind of led to starting me to think around those lines. There's something very comforting when you're in your home, the home that you grew up in, that you don't have to ask them questions. It's obvious. They're telling you left, right, and center every day. You wake up, you know, you live in a house that you grew up in, so it's kind of like there. But now you're in an environment where those things don't exist. And what does it mean to navigate that space? Do I want to change that space? Do I want to keep that space because I don't want it to be anything like where I came from? I don't know. These are all the questions that started bubbling up inside of me, and they brought a hell of a lot of emotions. Guilt, sadness, happiness, freedom, like all of the things. And that's when I started to realize it's actually quite tenuous, and like there's, given on the day or the hour, it could change. And I wanted to be in that space and figure out what that means for my work. So yeah.
There's a question in the exhibition that was, what terrain have you had to navigate, right? And what are the unruly means by which you do it? But your work actually replicates that over and over, and over different terrain.
Yeah.
Did I see another question?
No.
Okay. So, how am I on time? I'm doing terrible at this, y'all. I have not checked time. I'm not even looking at. Okay, we're at time. Okay, perfect. Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone so much, also for contributing to this universe of thought that we've come together. Thank you, Anina, for convening us.
Thank you. And thank
allowing
you all
us
for
to be
coming
around.
out.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, everyone.
And I want to thank both of you. Thank you, Hijo. Thank you, Anina, for this really, really thoughtful conversation, and the performance as well. It was a really lovely pairing, so thank you both. Thank you, all of you, for attending, for participating. I encourage you to continue engaging with the museum, whether that's becoming a member, making a donation, or continuing to come to our programs and exhibitions. You can learn more about our upcoming programs on our website, moadsf.org. Please spread the word. We also appreciate hearing from you. We would love for you to use the QR code on your chair to share some program feedback and let us know what you'd like to see in the future. And lastly, our galleries are open till 8 p.m., so please do have a chance to see Anina's work in the theater, explore our full galleries, and we also will be having a small reception in this space, so continue to mingle and talk with everyone. So thank you all.